Grace's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the narrow brick wall in the dim streetlight. Night had settled over the quiet suburb, and everything seemed deceptively calm. Just moments before, however, a frantic series of barks and splintered steps had shattered the stillness, drawing the attention of passers-by and the city's attention in equal measure. As the world spun around her, Grace could hardly believe that only moments ago her life had been steadily moving toward the joy of new beginnings, with her belly swollen with hope and anticipation of the child growing inside. Now, with fear etching lines on her face, Grace found herself caught in a battle between instinct and reason. The barks had echoed from the alley behind her small row house, a cacophony of desperation that no one could ignore. The sound had been unusual for the quiet street, and when a neighbor hurriedly emerged from her doorway to investigate, Grace instinctively clutched her swollen stomach even tighter. The gentle hum of routine was shattered wholly by the frantic cries of a large dog, its snarl edged with confusion, panic, and perhaps a hint of warning. What was it that the animal feared, and why had it singled her out so ruthlessly in its desperate barking? These questions churned in Grace's mind as she tried to steady herself while still reeling from the shock. Earlier that day, Grace's thoughts had been occupied by dreams of a peaceful future, a future filled with the laughter of her soon-to-be-born child and quiet moments spent in the warm glow of contentment. She had spent her morning setting up a cozy nook in the living room, determined that every corner of her home should welcome the new life. Yet as she glanced over her shoulder at the dim outline of the alley, an unsettling thought crept in. There was something more than the usual stray canine routine in that somehow anxious bark. There was a message hidden within the urgent howl, a warning of danger that had not yet become manifest in her mind. No one around knew the full truth that lay hidden beneath the soft facade of routine existence in these quiet suburban streets. For weeks, an unseen tension had been building beneath the surface, a tension that only the gentle eyes of a stray dog, bearing witness to more than any human could see, might understand. Around the neighborhood, whispered speculations emerged like ghosts in the dark, the murmurs of a secret unfolding, a truth more sinister than anyone had imagined. The police had started to receive anonymous tips about an underlying menace, and though most dismissed them as urban legends born of idle imaginations, some officers took the messages to heart. On this fateful night, gleaming under the flickering streetlights and the disquieting hum of silent engines, a patrol car slowly made its way to the scene. Officers Miller and Sanchez had heard the commotion before receiving the call, and instinct had propelled them closer to the unfolding drama than cautious reasoning ever might. The call was strange, one that mentioned a pregnant woman and a dog barking relentlessly in the dark, and though a seasoned officer might have expected a simple misunderstanding or perhaps a minor disturbance, the palpable sense of dread emanating from the scene told a deeper story. As the police vehicle pulled up, its red and blue lights painted shifting patterns on the walls of houses, it soon became clear that what lay ahead was far from a typical night patrol. Grace's heart pounded as the officers approached, their expressions drawn and determined. Her eyes glistened with tears, part fear, part confusion, and for a moment, she could barely speak. The officers knelt down beside her, offering gentle assurances that they were there to help, unaware that the real mystery was still unfolding behind her in the shadowed alleyway. The dog, its ears sharp and eyes wild, had been the only sentinel that night. Its relentless barking seemed to cry out a truth that no one else was yet willing to embrace. The canine's fierce loyalty appeared to be a desperate bid to alert the world to a danger too profound to ignore, a danger that had already begun to seep into the fabric of the neighborhood. Earlier that afternoon, Grace had visited the local market, a quaint space where neighbors met, shared smiles, and exchanged small confidences over fresh produce. That same market had been the stage for lively conversations about upcoming community events, the pleasant exchange of gossip, and the subtle undercurrents of unease that seemed to bind everyone together. Over cups of steaming tea, a few regulars had mentioned an odd figure seen lurking around the perimeter of the market, someone who did not quite belong. The name of the figure was never spoken aloud, for it was as if the very mention of it would summon trouble upon the peaceful town. That day, while Grace had been picking out the ripest fruits and the freshest bread, the shadow of something hidden had loomed just beyond her awareness, waiting for its moment to force its presence upon her unsuspecting life. In the dull haze of twilight, as Grace made her way back home, every step seemed measured by fate. The distance between her and the market was short, yet the world around her pulsed with a strange energy, a quiet desperation that seemed tied to the slow passing of time. It was as if the normal cadence of life had been momentarily disturbed by a force that demanded attention, an uninvited guest wearing the cloak of inevitability. The echoes of the stray dog's barks might have been the very manifestation of that force, trying to carve a path through the night to present a dire warning that no one was ready to heed. Every small noise, from the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze to the distant murmur of voices in the nearby street, seemed to mix into a chaotic symphony that resonated with the quiet desperation of the animals' cries. Inside her home, Grace's sanctuary was filled with reminders of the impending new chapter, a crib half-assembled, carefully chosen baby clothes laid out in pastel colors, a collection of picture books waiting to be read aloud. But now, as the sound of urgent barking reverberated, those symbols of hope and life were bedeviled by a cloud of impending doom. For the more Grace pondered, the clearer it became that she was being surrounded by a network of phenomena that defied logical explanation. It was as though the dog was not merely a random creature reacting to a disturbance but a herald of something unsettling, something that had already brushed against the fabric of her life with stealth and precision. As the officers escorted her safely away from the immediate danger posed by the restless critter, the narrative of that night began to converge in unexpected ways. Outside the small confines of her humble abode, a dark figure had been silently watching, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. This individual had been connected to long-forgotten secrets and meddled in affairs that often spilled over into the quiet corners of the community, leaving behind traces that only the most sensitive eyes could detect. In the dim glow of the lanterns, as shadows lengthened and merged with the night, this stranger's eyes burned with an intensity that belied the calm of his surroundings. With careful steps and an air of predatory precision, he melted into the dark, leaving behind a trail of questions that would soon haunt the corridors of justice. Miller and Sanchez weren't aware of the chilling gaze of this mysterious observer as they devoted themselves to comforting Grace and investigating the source of the dog's frantic behavior. Their senses were attuned to every minute detail, the trembling of Grace's hands, the nervous glances exchanged by neighbors peering through their windows, and the rich, almost instinctive roar of the dog that refused to relent. In the realm of police work, intuition is as vital as evidence, and on a night like this, nothing could be left to chance. With deliberate steps, the officers followed the echoing trail of barking into the lesser-known corners of the neighborhood, where narrow lanes and darkened alleys convinced the mind that secrets were not so rare in the modern world. As the officers advanced, their flashlights cutting swaths of brightness through the murky air, they encountered unexpected signs, a discarded scarf, a set of footprints, and a trail of disturbed earth that led away from the scene of the commotion. Each clue increased the urgency of the investigation, pointing toward a complex web of events that had been woven in silence and perhaps purposefully concealed from the casual observer. The pungent odor of damp earth mingled with the cold scent of metal from the officers' guns, underscoring the gravity of the situation. It wasn't long before the realization dawned on the officers: the dog had been acting not out of mere animal instinct, but in a desperate effort to alert them about a hidden threat, a threat that was as human as it was mysterious. The neighborhood, once a beacon of tranquility, had suddenly transformed into a labyrinth of secrets and half-whispered stories. Miller and Sanchez meticulously traced every footprint, piecing together the puzzle with methodical precision. Amid their search, the officers began to understand that the case was far more intricate than it appeared at first glance. Grace's own story, filled with hopes and dreams of motherly love, had now merged with a saga of deception, treachery, and long-buried grudges. Each revelation served as a stark reminder that life was unpredictable, filled with moments where beauty could swiftly collapse into chaos, leaving behind only shadows of regret and whispers of what might have been. While the officers investigated on the streets, the mysterious figure from before lingered in the periphery, unseen by those wrapped up in their desperate search for truth. He moved through the darkness with an eerie grace that belied the turmoil his presence brought. Every so often, his eyes flickered in the light of a passing car, a silent nod to the inner workings of a mind burdened with guilt and menace. The figure's connection to the recent unfolding drama was layered in complexity. Once a trusted member of the community, he had fallen from grace in circumstances that no one dared speak of openly, and now he appeared as both a witness and an active participant in the tragedy that enveloped the quiet streets. As hours passed and the investigation deepened, fragments of the truth began to coalesce into an ominous picture. Ray, a longtime friend of Grace's and an observant soul who often preferred staying at his small workshop down the street, had noticed unusual activity in the area for weeks. Ray, whose quiet curiosity frequently led him to explore beyond his immediate environment, had observed strange lights at odd hours and had once caught sight of the mysterious figure skulking near the back fence of a neighbor's yard. In his mind, the subtle signals formed a mosaic of disquiet that he had long suspected could be linked to clandestine meetings and secret arrangements between a network of individuals whose true motives were never fully revealed to the public. As he slowly pieced together the gossip and hints fed over months, Ray began to suspect that the night's tragic events were inextricably tied to something much larger, a hidden conspiracy that stretched through the layers of society like a dark undercurrent. Meanwhile, as Miller and Sanchez examined the accumulating evidence near the alley, the sound of the relentless dogs barking finally began to fade, leaving behind an echo of unanswered questions. Grace, now safely in the back of the patrol car, sat wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the officers, her eyes wide with the dawning realization that her world was no longer as safe and predictable as it once had been. In the vehicle's confined space, she replayed the night's events in slow, disjointed fragments, the sound of barks, the flash of red and blue lights, the quivering hands, the fleeting glimpse of a dark figure vanished into the night, and the tiny kick felt deep within her that promised life amid the chaos. Each memory wound itself tighter in the tapestry of her experience, binding her fears and hopes in a moment that was as definitive as it was haunting. In a small, sparse interrogation room at the local precinct later that night, Officer Sanchez carefully reviewed his notes and recordings. The dog's barks had been captured on a small audio device installed by the city in the aftermath of similar disturbances, and every faint sound had been scrutinized for clues. Sanchez's analytical mind worked through the evidence, the patterns in the barks, the timing relative to events that the ordinary citizen had no way of noticing. Proud of his analytical skills yet painfully aware that intuition must also hold sway in moments where logic alone could not account for the sinister forces at play, he quietly resolved to leave no piece of the puzzle unturned, even if that meant delving into areas of the community that were best left unspoken. Across town, in a modest apartment whose windows barely offered sanctuary from the ceaseless rains, an older man sat before a cluttered desk strewn with yellowing papers and faded photographs. James, a retired journalist with a lifetime of experience uncovering hard-to-find truths, had been following whispers of corruption and hidden agendas in the community for years. Though long past his prime and often dismissed by newer colleagues, his instincts remained finely tuned to the undercurrents of human behavior. That night, he had pored over a stack of old files in his solitude, re-examining connections between cases that the police had long since forgotten or dismissed as inconsequential. Now, as the investigation in the streets took an unexpected turn, James felt a chill crawl up his spine. He remembered stories of a secret society that had once operated in the very heart of the community, a secret that had left indelible marks on the souls of those who had dared to uncover it. With trembling resolve, he reached for a faded photograph of a man whose intense eyes and stern expression spoke of a life dedicated to protecting the truth at any cost. Back on the street, the wind had picked up as Officers Miller and Sanchez continued their pursuit of every possible lead. The clamor of nighttime disturbances had given way to an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound of a car passing by or a solitary voice murmuring in the dark. The deserted surroundings seemed to hold their breath, aware that each moment brought deeper into focus a convergence of past misdeeds and future calamities. Unbeknownst to the officers, the dark figure they had once glimpsed was already mobilizing a plan, one born of desperation and remorse, fueled by the realization that his own history was irretrievably entwined with the fate of those around him. His thoughts were a tangled mess of regret, determination, and an acute understanding that the online whispers of a cataclysm were now manifesting in real time. As the night slowly surrendered to the inevitable gray dawn, the mystery took on a different hue. In a quiet cul-de-sac where childhood memories danced in the mind like flickering shadows, neighbors gathered on their porches to exchange theories and silently re-evaluate their once stable sense of security. At the heart of these murmurs was a pervasive uncertainty, a question that might never be answered until all the loose ends were tied together. The dog's frantic barks had not been in vain. They had served as an alarm bell that alerted not only the police but also awakened dormant suspicions in the hearts of many who otherwise had slept soundly through nights unmarked by fear. In that subtle transition from irresponsibility to vigilance, there lay the potential for redemption or ruin, a fragile promise that the truth, however painful, might yet prevail against forces that should have long been consigned to the shadows. Grace, sight still blurred by tears and adrenaline, could now only wait as the unfolding drama continued to twist around her life. In the silence of the hospital waiting room that arrived hours later, she sat side by side with a close friend who had driven her there immediately after the initial commotion. The sterile environment of polished floors and whispered corridors did little to ease the burden of the night's revelations. Each beat from the distant machines became a metronome counting down to an unknown destiny. It was here that Grace overheard bits of conversation, a nurse speaking of a series of events that did not fit neatly into the usual narratives of accidental intrusion or random misfortune, a doctor whose eyes revealed there was more at stake than just a frightened patient. The air in the hospital was thick with uncertainty, and the frantic energy of a community in distress surged through every sterile hallway. In a small corner of the hospital, a seasoned detective who had been monitoring the case with a mixture of skepticism and hidden hope reviewed a series of photographs and witness statements on an aging laptop. Detective Ramirez, known for his diligence and unwavering pursuit of truth, had long suspected that the case in question was not merely a simple disturbance but a complex tapestry woven with threads from the past that were too messy to unravel effortlessly. With deep-set eyes that betrayed countless sleepless nights spent pondering over leads and discarded evidence, Ramirez slowly started stitching together the disparate elements of the case. Each new revelation about the mysterious figure, the stray dog, and the unnerving connection to Grace's recent experiences created a puzzle that was both beguiling and ominous. Ramirez was certain that the key to this mystery lay hidden in the small details: a well-worn scarf in an unassuming doorway, a whispered rumor in an otherwise quiet cafe, and a photograph of a man whose eyes echoed the sins of a bygone era. Outside, as the dark remnants of night receded further into the past, the neighborhood began to stir with the cautious energy of a community coming to grips with a profound disturbance. Law enforcement agencies gathered evidence, questioned residents, and retraced every footprint that might lead back to the lurking menace in the hidden corners of the city. The dog, which had first drawn attention with its desperate barks, now sat quietly in the corner of the local animal shelter, a silent reminder of a night that had upended the carefully curated notion of safety. Its eyes, though calm now, seemed to hold a secret message, a truth that lay beyond the comprehension of those who had merely followed procedural checklists and recorded physical evidence. To trust the message of those unassuming voices, like the one of that loyal animal, required a leap of faith, a leap that would demand a willingness to confront buried memories and long-suppressed fears. Over time, the investigation drew lines that connected incidents from the last several months. Stories emerged of strange encounters and unexplained happenings at odd hours, a knock at a door when no one was home, flashlights moving in patterns too deliberate to be random, whispers of a secret meeting held under cover of darkness in abandoned buildings at the edge of town. In one instance, a local businessman recounted how his car had been tampered with in a way that pointed to a systematic campaign of intimidation, an act that seemed to have no relation to any rival business but rather hinted at a pervasive influence that had quietly infiltrated the community. As disparate accounts began to converge, the tapestry of a dark undercurrent became alarmingly clear. Something was orchestrating a series of events designed to push the residents of the town to the brink of both suspicion and paranoia. Grace, who had once embraced life with a gentle faith in the goodness of her neighbors, now regarded the familiar faces around her with cautious wariness. Friends who had smiled warmly in the bright light of day now appeared shadowed by secrets. The revelation that she had unknowingly been involved in a conspiracy that stretched far beyond her own personal sphere left a lingering sense of betrayal that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The community had once thrived on trust and intimacy, where every person's story intermingled with the next, creating a rich tapestry of shared experiences. Now, that tapestry was tarnished by threads of injustice and hidden plots, leaving residents adrift in a sea of uncertainty. In a small but determined move to reclaim some semblance of control over her life, Grace resolved to actively engage with the investigation. Though still recovering from the ordeal, she agreed to speak with Detective Ramirez, hoping that her own recollections might help piece together the scattered clues. Sitting across from him in an interview room bathed in soft, diffused light, Grace recounted every detail as best as memory allowed. From the unusual sensation that night, when the dog barked with a timbre of sorrow, to the unfathomable glimpse of the dark figure slipping away like a ghost, her recollections were punctuated by moments of hesitation and conviction. Detective Ramirez listened intently, scribbling notes on a pad while his eyes occasionally drifted to the photograph of the man from the archive. In that photograph, he saw the threads of the past intertwine with the present, a symbolic representation of how unresolved histories could extend their influence into the modern era with devastating consequences. As days turned into nights and back again, the investigation slowly began to yield disturbing truths. A consortium of corrupted individuals, who had once been respected figures in the community, were unmasked as part of an elaborate network controlling secrets and manipulating events for their own gain. Their influence had seeped into every facet of public life, from local law enforcement to municipal planning, under the guise of promoting safety and prosperity. It was a revelation that shook the very foundation of what the town had come to believe. The dog's desperate barks, once dismissed as a mere reaction to confusion, took on a new, chilling significance, a call to arms against a system that had long abused its power and silenced voices that dared to speak out. In the ensuing chaos, Grace's own story became intertwined with the community's struggle for truth. With every new piece of evidence emerging, the narrative shifted, revealing the deep scars left by betrayal and the relentless determination of those who sought to expose the darkness hidden beneath the facade of normalcy. The once quiet streets were now corridors of whispered secrets and covert meetings, where every individual carried a burden of knowing that the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. In that charged atmosphere, the role of the dog, the unspoken messenger, was celebrated as a silent hero, whose instincts had bridged the gap between a mundane night and the eruption of a conspiracy that would change the town forever. As Detective Ramirez assembled pieces of evidence into a coherent whole, he came to a disturbing conclusion: time was of the essence. The conspirators, sensing that their carefully constructed network was under threat, began to tighten their grip and silence those who risked becoming liabilities. In hushed conversations over secure lines and clandestine meetings held far from prying eyes, they deliberated their next moves. Their plans, once shrouded in secrecy, now began to unravel before a determined opposition. The detectives' data suggested that Grace's encounter was no accident. It had been a deliberate act orchestrated by forces that were desperate to hide their misdeeds at any cost. Outside, as dawn fully broke over the now tumultuous streets, an unforeseen twist sent ripples of shock through every community member. An emergency broadcast echoed over local radio channels, a revelation that another victim had been discovered, its connections to the dark network too clear to ignore. The victim, a local clerk renowned for his unwavering kindness, had been found in a deserted lot on the outskirts of town, a place that had become a dumping ground for forgotten stories and abandoned dreams. The details were murky, yet the message was unmistakable: the conspirators were silencing anyone who could expose their misdeeds. The victim's body bore signs of a struggle, and the meticulous placement of cryptic symbols near him only deepened the mystery, leaving police officials grappling with evidence that seemed to point to a meticulously planned wave of violence. The magnitude of the conspiracy forced the police department to mobilize every available resource, and soon the investigation spread beyond the quiet confines of the neighborhood to involve higher authorities and specialized task forces. In a press conference held amidst a swirl of flashing cameras and probing questions, the chief of police acknowledged that the chain of events had grown into a public scandal of monumental proportions. The narrative was no longer confined to a single neighborhood's tragedy. It had morphed into a battle against corruption, a quest to reclaim the lost faith of a community betrayed by its own leaders. The press conference, though laden with carefully chosen words and rehearsed assurances, failed to mask the profound sense of urgency that gripped every officer. The voices in the press room seemed to echo with a collective determination that the truth, however dark, would eventually see the light of day. For Grace, the days following the press conference were a mixture of anxiety and an emerging resolve. Under the guidance of supportive community leaders and the empathy of dedicated police officers, she found solace in the growing movement of citizens demanding accountability. The once isolated figure of a vulnerable, pregnant woman now became a symbol of resilience, a beacon that shone amidst the encroaching gloom of corruption. With each step forward, Grace tapped into a wellspring of strength that had lain dormant, a strength kindled by the realization that even in moments of acute despair, hope could emerge as a powerful force of change. One fateful evening, as Grace walked home from a community gathering where impassioned voices decried the injustice that had befallen their town, she noticed a moving shadow flickering along the pavement. The dark figure, whose presence had once been an ominous specter in the alley, now approached with hesitant, almost melancholic steps. In a moment that suspended time, their eyes met, the figure's gaze a tumultuous mix of regret, desperation, and an unspoken plea for redemption. For a strained heartbeat, the world around them seemed to pause, a silent acknowledgement passing between two souls caught in the crossfire of events they never wished to be part of. The figure spoke softly, an admission of guilt piercing the quiet night. The words that tumbled out were not of violence, but of sorrow, a confession that the network he was part of was built on broken promises and a deep-seated fear of retribution. He implored a plea for mercy, expressing that he had been pressured into compliance by forces that defied his moral compass. His admission, as raw as it was honest, only added layers of complexity to a case that no one could have predicted. In the wake of this revelation, Detective Ramirez moved quickly to reassess the case. Conflicted by the unexpected confession of this figure, he began to question whether all the evidence he had collected pointed unequivocally to the conspirators, or if there were further hidden dimensions that defied simplistic categorization. The detective's investigation took him on a journey through old case files, community testimonies, and a labyrinth of digital records that spanned years. Each document he uncovered seemed tinged with faint echoes of a past where trust had been both a rare treasure and a dangerous liability. In these hours of contemplation, Ramirez discovered that the road to the truth was riddled not with clear distinctions between right and wrong but with blurred lines that demanded unwavering commitment to justice. Days passed in a whirlwind of interrogations, forensic breakthroughs, and the gradual rallying of community support. Grace found refuge in the shared determination of those who had been touched by the darkness. Late one afternoon, as sunlight struggled to pierce the thick clouds overhead, she attended a small neighborhood meeting where local citizens exchanged memories of past grievances, frustrations about unexplained disappearances, and their fervent desire for transparency. The meeting, held in an old community center now converted into a temporary hub for activists, resonated with the collective heartbeat of the town. For once, the focus was not solely on the tragedy that had unfolded that night but on the broader implications of a corrupt system that had undermined the very foundation of trust. In that open forum, where voices merged in a defiant chorus against tyranny, Grace recognized the power of collective unity, a force that, much like the desperate barks of the loyal dog, sought to alert an indifferent world to hidden dangers. In the ensuing days, as the investigation began coalescing into actionable leads, a renewed vigor swept through the town. Detective Ramirez and his team, empowered by the unwavering commitment of community leaders and ordinary citizens alike, began to dismantle the long-standing network of corruption one thread at a time. Every piece of evidence unearthed became a stepping stone toward not only unmasking the conspirators but also towards healing wounds that had festered in silence for far too long. The dark figure's confession, while not entirely exonerating him, had provided a vital insight into the internal conflicts plaguing the network, a hint that not everyone involved was beyond redemption. The possibility that even those who had once betrayed the community could join in a collective act of contrition and recompense sparked debates among both officials and citizens alike. For many, it was a reminder that in the face of overwhelming injustice, the smallest act of empathy, a conversation with an adversary, could sow the seeds for a more humane and accountable future. As autumn descended over the town, painting the landscape with hues of amber and melancholy, the community began to reclaim its narrative. Grace and Detective Ramirez, now bound by their shared quest for truth, continued to labor side by side, their investigation transforming into a movement that spanned neighborhoods, transcending old divisions. The memory of that fateful night, marked by the frantic barks that had first sounded the alarm, persisted as a symbol of resilience and the relentless search for answers. Slowly, the town began to heal, the scars of betrayal mending under the collective weight of hope, responsibility, and the recognition that even amid adversity, truth could be kindled. In one final, defining moment of closure, as a cold winter wind swept through the nearly empty streets, the police managed to unmask the full extent of the corruption that had threatened to dismantle the community's soul. In a dramatic raid orchestrated in the early hours of a frosty morning, high-ranking individuals who had once commanded respect and wielded influence without accountability were apprehended. The operation, meticulously planned and executed with cold efficiency, confirmed the suspicions that had haunted every whispered conversation and every desperate bark in the night. For Grace, standing silently among a cluster of neighbors gathered outside the facility where the conspirators were being held, the moment bore the bittersweet weight of closure and loss. The echoes of that tragic night mingled with profound relief, a reminder of the fragility of safety in a world where darkness sometimes lurked behind the most familiar faces. In the weeks and months that followed, the community embraced a new beginning forged through the trials of hardship and the shared determination to rebuild what had been lost. Grace, once a figure of vulnerability, emerged as a pillar of strength and advocacy for victims of silent injustice. Her story, intertwined with the legacy of the dog whose desperate barks had set in motion a sequence of events that ultimately exposed corruption, became a testament to the importance of listening to even the quietest voices in the dark. She continued to work closely with local leaders and reform-minded officials to promote transparency, accountability, and communal healing. Every lesson learned from that turbulent chapter was logged in the collective consciousness of the town, a reminder that sometimes, it takes an unexpected cry for help, even from a creature as humble as a dog, to awaken a sleepy community to the dire truths that lie just beneath the surface. As the final traces of winter melted away into the hopeful promise of spring, the tale of that fateful night became a cherished story passed from one generation to the next. The reluctant heroism of a stray dog, the steadfast determination of a brave detective, and the unexpected strength of a vulnerable woman mingled in a narrative that transcended time and circumstance. The dark secrets that had once threatened to consume the town ultimately became catalysts for change, a transformation that renewed trust, fostered unity, and imbued a lasting legacy of resilience. Every whispered bark in the silence of the night served as a reminder that even in the deepest twilight, the sign of hope can be discovered if one is willing to listen. In the end, the community emerged stronger, bound by the shared understanding that the cries of the vulnerable, no matter how desperate or overlooked, deserve to be heard. The journey from darkness to light was long and treacherous, but in the hearts of those who had dared to confront the truth, there glowed an unwavering flame, one that would forever illuminate the path to justice, compassion, and a renewed commitment to the sanctity of life. And so, as the town resumed its peaceful rhythms under the gentle warmth of the morning sun, a quiet silence settled, a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the echoes of truth, the power of unity, and the enduring memory of a night when a dog's desperate barks changed everything forever. The morning light revealed more layers of the town's transformation as the investigations that had shaken its very core began to bear new fruit. In the weeks following the dramatic raid, as families emerged from a long winter of mistrust and sorrow, a subtle undercurrent of hope mingled with the lingering scars of betrayal. Grace found herself busier than ever, her days filled not only with the tender rituals of impending motherhood, but also with community meetings, advocacy sessions, and a mission to ensure that the hard-won justice of that fateful night would not fade into silence. Each conversation she had with neighbors or officials evoked a quiet determination, a shared understanding that while darkness may have once reigned, the light of truth now guided their steps. Detective Ramirez, who had become a symbol of uncompromising integrity during this tumultuous chapter, continued to unravel the tightly woven threads of corruption with the assistance of a new team of young officers eager to learn from his experience. As he pored over aged records and weathered photographs, he began to suspect that the conspiracy may have roots far deeper than anyone had anticipated, a hidden network stretching beyond past political or financial greed into personal vendettas and centuries-old grudges. Late nights in his cramped, cluttered office were spent examining dusty case files and obscure connections that hinted at a history of silencers who had deliberately eradicated inconvenient truths. The renewed investigation, far from a simple rehashing of old evidence, took him on a journey of rediscovery, of the town's hidden past, its secret alliances, and the unspoken promises made in shadowed corners. Meanwhile, in a modest café that had once been a favorite of local writers and dreamers, Ray, whose workshop had provided solace and practical wisdom in equal measure, found himself thrust into a role he had never imagined. Having been one of the very few to notice the subtle signs of unrest weeks before that grim night, he recounted his detailed observations in a series of interviews with an independent journalist who was determined to reveal the history behind the conspiracy. Every memory, every detail, from the timbre of an offhand remark to the cadence of hurried footsteps in deserted corridors, served not only as evidence, but as an integral thread in the tapestry of the community's shared memory. Through his comments, the once overlooked minutiae of everyday life were elevated to the status of historical records, bridging the gap between individual experiences and the larger narrative of collective redemption. A newfound energy began to pulse through the community. What had been an atmosphere of defeat and resignation was slowly replaced by a spirited movement to rebuild. At town hall meetings, impassioned speeches blended with quiet tears of remembrance to form a chorus of accountability and resilience. Some residents organized memorials for those who had fallen victim to the nefarious network, while others launched local initiatives aimed at preserving historical truths and ensuring transparency in government affairs. This reinvigoration of civic pride and responsibility was most visible in the formation of grassroots organizations dedicated not only to vigilante oversight but also to the nurturing of a culture where every voice, no matter how quiet, could be amplified and heard. For Grace, this meant that her personal tragedy had grown into something universally saddening yet empowering, a clarion call for justice that transcended individual hardship. In the midst of these sweeping communal changes, whispers of unfinished business began to surface. Rumors spoke of a cache of encrypted diaries hidden within the walls of an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, documents believed to contain the unfiltered confessions and incriminating details of some of the very architects of the previous conspiracy. A curious mix of fear and determination gripped the hearts of those who recognized that these writings could be the missing link, the definitive piece of evidence that would expose any residual members of the dark network. With quiet trepidation, Detective Ramirez agreed to a covert operation aimed at retrieving these documents, aware that every new piece of information could potentially turn the tide in a struggle that had already left so much in its wake. Late one humid night, as the town slept in a fragile calm and the only sound was the rustle of wind through nearly forgotten alleyways, a select team stealthily approached the decrepit building. The exterior, cloaked in a thick patina of graffiti and urban decay, seemed to whisper secrets of a bygone era. With precise and deliberate moves, the officers infiltrated the structure, their flashlights painting brief streaks of light on dusty floors and peeling wallpaper. In a narrow compartment hidden behind a false wall, they discovered a collection of leather-bound diaries, their pages riddled with cryptic notes and dated in an era that stretched back decades. Each entry was a confessional narrative documenting clandestine meetings, coded instructions, and an insidious plan to manipulate the town's fortune. The discovery sent a palpable chill through the team, not because the conspiracy had already been largely unmasked, but because this evidence suggested that remnants of the network might still be at large, lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to reassert their control. The following morning, Detective Ramirez convened an emergency meeting with both his senior officers and key community leaders. The grave implications of the diaries were discussed vigorously. If the documents were authentic, then the historical roots of oppression and manipulation ran deeper than any recent act of treachery. The meeting was held in a renovated community center, its walls echoing the determined voices of people who had refused to be defined by the past. As the group pored over the translated entries, a plan began to take shape, a blueprint for a comprehensive inquiry that would not only bring all remaining conspirators to light but would also initiate a long-overdue public reckoning with the town's hidden history. For every word that was deciphered, a collective resolve was fortified: they must expose every shadow that had once threatened their peaceful existence. Grace, now more a public figure than ever, took on a leadership role that defied her previous vulnerability. Embracing her newfound platform, she organized community forums where historians, legal experts, survivors, and even repentant individuals could share their experiences and insights. In one of these meetings, held in the town's old auditorium beneath a mosaic of forgotten murals, a panel discussion sparked heated debate about historical accountability and the complex interplay between personal redemption and collective justice. Memories spilled forth in heartfelt testimonies, and for many, the process was cathartic, a cleansing ritual that slowly exorcised the lingering spirits of mistrust and pain. In these gatherings, it became increasingly apparent that the town's transformation was not merely about eradicating corruption, but about healing deeply embedded wounds and forging an unbreakable bond based on truth, empathy, and mutual respect. As spring blossomed outside and the scent of fresh rain mingled with new beginnings, Detective Ramirez distilled new insights from the diaries. Analyzing the coded messages embedded within the seemingly innocuous prose, he began mapping out relationships between long-forgotten community elites. Business owners, influential public servants, and even prominent families whose ancestral lineage intertwined with the town's darkest chapters. The detective uncovered connections that defied the sanitized narratives once taught in local schools, revealing instead a history where silence was a weapon and secrecy a survival tactic. With each revelation, the community's understanding of itself evolved, prompting an introspective examination of how power, legacy, and collective memory could be intertwined in ways that both enriched and imprisoned their shared identity. In the midst of scholarly debates and investigative breakthroughs, a surprising opportunity for reconciliation emerged. The repentant figure from that long, stormy night, the one who had once confessed his complicit role in the network, had approached the authorities a second time, seeking to offer further insight into the archaic structure of the conspiracy. Over the course of a series of controlled interviews, he revealed not only details about past collaborations but also disclosed that several influential figures had managed to evade accountability, their names shielded by layers of bureaucracy and long-standing alliances. His total admission, painful as it was, became a turning point in the ongoing quest for truth, challenging entrenched power dynamics and forcing the community to confront the disturbing reality that betrayal had been woven into the very fabric of their collective history. This second wave of revelations propelled the investigation into a new phase, a legal inquest that reached the highest echelons of state governance. News channels buzzed with the latest updates, and the national media began to focus its lens on the town that had once shunned scandal only to become its unwilling epicenter. The hearings, conducted in a packed courthouse beneath a giant emblem of justice, were frenetic and fraught with tension. At every turn, evidentiary challenges and emotional testimonies collided with the cold precision of legal argumentation. Grace testified before a panel of judges and investigative lawyers, her voice steady even as her eyes betrayed the memory of a long night filled with fear and resolve. With each word, she affirmed not just her own fight for survival, but the larger struggle for truth that resonated far beyond the quiet streets of her hometown. In the ensuing months, as trials commenced and old alliances disintegrated under the weight of public scrutiny, the town itself underwent a metamorphosis. The once oppressive air of secrecy was replaced by a measured openness, a cautious celebration of transparency. Community-run museums began curating exhibits that detailed both the hidden conspiracies and the remarkable resilience of a people determined to right the wrongs of the past. School programs were revamped to include local history. A curriculum that did not shy away from the uncomfortable truths but instead embraced them as lessons in vigilance and empowerment. In every corner, from the graffiti-scarred walls of abandoned alleys to the halls of freshly renovated town institutions, symbols of change were etched, reminding everyone that even the darkest chapters could eventually pave the way for a brighter future. Yet even as reformation took hold, Detective Ramirez remained vigilant. Beneath the optimism lay the constant awareness that darkness often finds fertile ground in the cracks of complacency. Late into quiet nights, when the wind hummed through empty streets, he would revisit the diaries and his own notes, piecing together any anomalies that might hint at lingering threats. His resolve was unyielding, a firm belief that even a small spark of resistance against injustice was essential for sustaining the hard-won light of truth. His ongoing investigations, though now supported by a cadre of adept young officers and empowered community members, were never far from his thoughts. Each case reopened, each new testimony recorded, served as a reminder that the battle for integrity was a marathon, not a sprint. In the midst of all this, Grace continued to evolve. Embracing her role as both a mother-to-be and a community leader, she found solace and strength in the small yet significant moments that punctuated her busy days: a shared laugh with a longtime friend, a quiet message of encouragement from a stranger, and the unwavering support of those who had joined her in rewriting their shared destiny. It was in these moments of tenderness, even as the larger machinery of justice turned inexorably forward, that she realized the true impact of their collective struggle: the power to transform pain into purpose, despair into determination, and isolation into unity. Looking forward, the town, once overshadowed by fear and secrecy, started to inspire neighboring communities and even state agencies to re-examine their inherent systems of accountability. Collaborative workshops, interagency forums, and regional cultural exhibits blossomed from the seed sown in that critical moment when a dog's desperate barks awakened a city. The narrative of their transformation was documented in books and documentaries, becoming an enduring reminder that no matter how deep the shadows, the persistent, courageous light of human truth could break through. As if echoing the rhythmic cadence of the town's revival, the gentle persistent barking of stray dogs could now be heard in the distance, a subtle nod to the unassuming hero that had once signaled the hidden perils. To the people of that community, the dog came to symbolize an eternal sentinel, a creature guided by instinct and unclouded by fear, capable of alerting a vulnerable community to an impending injustice that otherwise might have gone unanswered. And so, as the town marched forward with a renewed sense of purpose, every bark in the quiet dark was met with ears and hearts wide open, a constant reminder that vigilance and compassion must forever guide the path of truth and justice. Even as the monumental legal proceedings wound their intricate course and new layers of investigation unfolded with every dawn, the residents learned to trust not only in the power of their institutions but in the collective strength of their shared stories. In the years that followed, new leaders emerged from the collaborative spirit of the recent past. They carried forward a legacy that was both a tribute to those who had suffered under the weight of corruption and a promise that future generations would never turn a blind eye to the quiet calls for help emanating from the depths of everyday life. Thus, the narrative continued, a living, breathing chronicle of resilience, redemption, and the endless quest for a society where every cry, regardless of its origin, mattered. And in that ongoing story, the once shadowed streets now sang of hope, etched with the indelible truth that while the past might be marred by sorrow, a future forged in truth, empathy, and unwavering resolve was always within reach. With the case finally closed and the scars of the past slowly healing, the town found peace in a newfound era of transparency and unity. As the seasons changed and the community rebuilt itself brick by brick, the memories of those dark days became not a source of perpetual sorrow, but a reminder of the strength that comes from speaking truth to power. Grace, now a proud mother and an inspiring leader, continued to nurture both her child and the bonds that held her community together. The stray dog, once a harbinger of desperate warnings, became a beloved symbol, a living reminder that sometimes even the smallest voice can spark a revolution. Detective Ramirez and his dedicated colleagues remained watchful, their commitment to justice never waning, ensuring that the integrity of the town was preserved for future generations. Under the clear blue skies and amidst the bustle of everyday life, the community learned to embrace hope and resilience, knowing that though the past had been painful, it also had paved the way for a brighter, more accountable future. And so, in the gentle cadence of everyday life, the story reached its quiet end, a poignant testament to the enduring power of truth, unity, and the everlasting promise of redemption.